Hey guys, it's Katie. Welcome back to my channel. Or if you're new here, hi, my name is Katie Wismer. I'm an author and an editor. All my stuff is linked down below. And today's video might be the start of a new series on the channel. It'll just kind of depend on how this one does and if you guys seem to like it. Basically, the idea was I wanted to talk about author money. Now, I've made plenty of money videos in the past. If you're interested in any of them, I'll have them all linked down below. But probably the most common question that I get is along the lines of how am I able to be a writer full-time? Do I have any advice for people wanting to go full-time? All of that kind of stuff. So the idea for this series is to talk about all things money going in, money coming out, different sources of making money, different things you spend money on as an author, leaving it pretty open-ended, lots of different opportunities there. So if there are specific topics that you would love to see talked about in the future, feel free to let me know down below in the comments. Today's video, we're going to be talking about Patreon. I've personally had a Patreon page since 2019, so it's been about over 4 years now. And I also do a pay what you can system on my Patreon page, so we will get into all of that. Basically, for this video, I wanted to talk about Patreon in general, using it as an author, my experience doing the pay what you can kind of system, my advice if you are an author looking to do some similar stuff, and then also, since we're talking about Patreon, and we'll get into all of it too, but I tend to go like very in-depth in the Patreon videos. I do all of the numbers and all of the nitty-gritty stats, so to give you a taste of what those kind of videos are like, we're gonna do that in this video. I'm going to give you more numbers than you could possibly have hoped for. I've got some charts. I'm going to give you all of the specific stats. I will put timestamps down below because I have a feeling this one might end up getting kind of long, or there just might be one section that you're more interested in than another. So if that sounds good, let's get started. This video is being sponsored. So a huge thank you to Art for sponsoring today's video. Speaking of author money, this is a book cover design company for indie authors. They offer quite a few different services, whether you're looking for a photo manipulated cover or an illustrated one, as well as formatting, layout, logo design and branding, author swag, and other marketing materials, which is nice if you just want to have one place to go to do basically everything. I really like their business design because it's really different from what I've seen from a lot of other design companies. Seeing as I'm 10 books in now and I've worked with a different designer for most of my books, I've had a lot of different experiences, but they offer unlimited revisions, and they also don't take a deposit on the cover, so you only pay at the very end once you are really happy with your result. They have lots of different designers who specialize in the different genres, so you can be confident that they know what they're doing. But one of the potentially most attractive things, because a lot of indie authors move really quickly, is their fast turnaround time. You can get a cover from them in 5 to 7 business days. So if you're someone who writes and publishes really fast, for one thing, I'm very jealous of you, but this might be a good option to look into. So if you're looking for a new cover designer and you want to check them out, I'll have all of their information linked down below. And without further ado, let's get straight into the video. So first, we're gonna talk about some Patreon basics, both the platform itself, but then also mine specifically. Then we'll get more into my experience, my advice. To be clear, I don't feel like I have the best setup right now, and I plan to shift things probably early next year. I've been doing the pay what you can system since the beginning of 2022, so it's been almost 2 full years now. So I feel like now is a good time for me to reevaluate and see how I want to proceed moving forward. I started the Patreon page back in 2019, right after I graduated college. Before I even started really publishing my books. At that point I only have 1 book out, which was The Sweetest Kind of Poison. So my Patreon page really started as just an extension of my YouTube channel. So the content over there has seen some shifts throughout the years, and even now, since the 2 years since I made the pay what you can change, I feel like my career and my priorities and stuff have shifted more. So my Patreon page is this like ever-evolving thing that just evolves with me. So now when I say I want to make changes, I want to cater towards the things that I'm focusing on now. I feel like more of an author than an editor and a YouTuber, but the original way I set up the Patreon page was from the perspective of an editor and a YouTuber. So a lot of my content is aimed at other authors and like teaching them things, or just viewers of my YouTube channel, like bonus vlogs and stuff. It's not really aimed at readers of my books right now, except for a couple of things. We'll get into it. So the way that my Patreon page works is you get access to bonus content that I post every single month. 3 pieces of bonus content go up every month, in addition to some other stuff. I post a self-publishing 101 video every month, which is again aimed at other authors, behind the scenes publishing, how to author kind of stuff. One is called my vlog club, which is basically just a bonus YouTube vlog. And then I also do a Q&A podcast every month where my Patreon people send in their questions and I answer them in a podcast format. In addition to the 3 new posts every month, you also get access to everything that's been posted previously. And since I've had the page for so long, there's almost 500 posts over there. So I definitely feel confident that you're getting like your bang for your buck. If you go back through all the old stuff, you have 500 things that you could go through. Like that will definitely fill up your time. And the pay what you can system basically means people can choose whichever tier they want that I've offered, and they all get the same content. Everything is accessible no matter which tier you're a part of. It's not that you get to choose which amount you pay, if that makes sense. You can't like choose, I want to pay $1.13. You have to choose one of the predetermined amounts of the tiers, but those tiers range pretty widely. I have a $5, a $7, a $10, and a $15 tier. This is also something that changed, so we will talk more on that in a second. I also offer, if you pay annually, you get 8% off, which might not sound like much, but basically that just means you get a month free. So in general, my experience with having a Patreon, it's always been something that's kind of like a little side hustle, a little part-time job. It's never been a full-time income on its own, and I've never expected it to be. Basically, if you're unfamiliar with Patreon in general, the idea behind it is to kind of emulate patrons from like olden times where rich people would pay artists to entertain them, basically. So the idea of Patreon is to support artists of all different kinds that you like in order for them to be able to make a living to continue to make the art that you enjoy. That's the idea of it. So for me, I've never like expected my Patreon to pay for my bills. I more think of it as it's some extra money coming in. It gives me this peace of mind. It's this almost passive income, we'll talk about it, that allows me to do my art full time rather than trying to make that same amount of money doing a part-time job elsewhere, which would take up a lot of my time and energy, and I wouldn't be able to create as much content or books or whatever. So people who are willing and able and want to support me in that way, they get the bonus content, but then they're also, I don't know, helping me continue to produce all of the art that I produce that they hopefully enjoy. So I will actually get into the specific numbers and stuff below. I just wanted to make it clear that in the same way that a lot of my other jobs, it's like none of them alone are enough to live on, but it's definitely not an insignificant amount. So if you're an author yourself looking to make more money elsewhere so you can do writing full-time, I think Patreon can be helpful. I don't know if it's going to be the solution all by itself, but I also, like I said, don't think I have the best setup. I know a lot of other authors who are way more successful at Patreon than me because they cater more towards that reader audience. But another factor to consider is how much time are you willing to put into your Patreon? How much effort are you willing to put into your Patreon? And if this is something that's meant to make your life easier so you can continue to create your art, if it's something that's draining you and it's adding more stress and you're putting so much time into this that you are actually taking away from your time to create your art, it kind of defeats the purpose. So if you're thinking of making one, definitely be clear on your goals up front and how much time you're willing to commit to it up front. So if you're wondering how much time I commit to my Patreon page, it really depends on which videos and extra pieces of content I'm making are, but I did come up with some averages. So for the podcast, it really depends on how many questions are submitted and how long it takes me to answer them. Sometimes my podcast ends up being about 20 minutes. I've had ones closer to 45 minutes or an hour long in the past. The average time between like reading, I have to like make a post asking people to submit their questions every month, reading through them, making some notes, deciding what I'm going to talk about, the actual recording of the podcast, the actual editing of the podcast, and then posting it and whatnot, can take anywhere from like 80 minutes to 3 hours. And I do that once during the month. The Self-Pub 101 video is probably the piece of content that will take me the longest amount of time, because those are the ones that not only I like plan the most, sometimes it's something I film throughout the month, like I'm doing an experiment for the whole month and I'm vlogging it, or I'm just like talking about it in a wrap up at the end of the month, like I'm trying a new marketing tactic, or I'm testing out a new service or a new software or something like that. And then the editing on those tends to take the longest as well, because it's not as cut and dry as like just making the regular cuts of a vlog. A lot of times I'm adding in screen recordings or I'm adding in screenshots, and it just takes longer. They're more complicated videos. So those ones will take anywhere from like 1 to 3 hours. And like I said, sometimes it's like I'm doing something throughout the month, so it's kind of hard to account for that. But that's the piece of content that definitely takes the most energy, time, and I also have to come up with those ideas every month. Sometimes it's easy. I've got topics that make sense. Sometimes it's hard for me to come up with the ideas. And then the extra vlog club, it's basically the same as the vlogs that I do for YouTube. Those again are anywhere from, I don't know, 10 to 30 minute long ones. Probably takes me anywhere from an hour to 3 hours, depending on how long the vlog ends up being, the editing and whatnot. So on average, all of the Patreon content that I make will take me anywhere from 3.5 to 9 hours for all of it. That's not including like responding to people's messages, responding to their comments. Sometimes I do other posts in there, like I'll post some YouTube videos early, or I'll say an announcement in there early. So it will take, those little things take some time too. But on average, I would say anywhere from like 4 to 9 hours. A little more on like the history of my Patreon page. I told you what I offer now. When I first started out, and this will connect to some of my pieces of advice, basically these are some of the mistakes that I made. I used to do a book club every month on Patreon where we would choose a book to read. We would all read the book together that month, and I would film a reading blog and kind of review of the book. That was back when my YouTube channel was more of a booktube channel rather than authortube. That definitely was a really big time commitment every month. And I also used to post 2 bonus Self-Pub 101 videos every month, and the book club and the podcast. So I definitely used to dedicate way more time to it. I stepped away from that after a couple of years because I wanted to put that time more towards my books, but also it was like the more bonus content had built up on the page, I felt better about posting less newer content every month, because I'm like, you still have like 500 other things you could watch, right? So I feel like you're still getting a good value if you're new to the page. I will say though, with the way the page is set up, just like the way that Patreon works, you have access to everything from when I started the pay what you can system, no matter what tier you're a part of. But if anything was posted before I made that change, before the beginning of 2022, there are certain pieces of content you can only access if you are in that tier that content was originally posted. The only way to change that would be go through every single post that I made before that and change the settings individually, one at a time. So I haven't done that and I don't plan on it. So anything posted before 2022 can only be accessed if you are in its original tier. So that'll be a good segue. Let's talk more about my experience with the pay what you can system, because that's not the way my Patreon page has always been run. I made the change the beginning of 2022. January of 2022 was the first month I did it. That was also, I think, the month that I cut back on how much content I went down to posting 1 bonus Self-Pub 101 video a month rather than 2. And I think the most common question I'll get when I tell people that it's a pay what you can system, like other authors and people who want to do a Patreon, is like, oh, so did everybody go to the lowest tier, right? Like that's what everyone wants to know. I have some graphs. I can show you. Short answer, yes, but not all at once. This also goes into why I say now my lowest tier is $5. It didn't used to be $2. I had to get rid of that. I had to change my mindset to like a mix of, this is a community and I'm so freaking grateful for everyone who's willing to pay for my content, who likes it enough to do that. Like that's a huge compliment, and these are the like most enthusiastic and like devoted of my readership and audience and whatnot, and I'm so grateful to have them here, and so I want to treat them as well as I possibly can, right? So I want to put myself in their shoes, and like I totally understand why you would want to go to the lower tiers, especially if you're someone who's been subscribed to the page for a really long time and you've been on one of the higher tiers, and then all of a sudden you're seeing people get everything that you've been paying more for. Maybe you want to go, like, I get it. But I also had to find a balance of thinking with my head and not just with my heart, and thinking about this from a business perspective. How much time am I investing into this? Is it sustainable for me to continue to make all of this if everyone's dropping down to the $2 tier? So I did end up axing the $2 tier, so now $5 is the cheapest. At first I made more money because I had a huge influx of new people coming to the Patreon page, because all of a sudden they could get all of this bonus content for $2. So, or $5, some people did join the higher tiers. But so at first when I made this shift, I saw a really big spike in my income. Let me find my graphs. I think I'll just put it here. This graph is how many members the page has. So you can very clearly see at the beginning of 2022, when I made that shift, how much it jumped up. It doubled completely. And you can see it kind of like started to go down, and now it's up and down, up and down, up and down. But it stayed relatively consistent, right? I think that big wave of people leaving was when I got rid of the $2 tier. So that's something that you can expect if you do this. You'll see all kinds of people come through your page. You'll have people who've been there for all 4 years and they've been a consistent person the entire time. They haven't changed tiers, they've just like stayed the same. You'll have ones who pop in for a month and then they'll leave, and then they'll come back a few months later, then they'll leave, and they'll come back a few months later. You'll have people who will come in for 1 month at the very lowest tier possible. I'm assuming they're consuming as much content as they can and then getting back out. So you'll see a mix. I wouldn't give much thought to month. When it fluctuates. I wouldn't think too much about it because it's just going to constantly ebb and flow. But you can see from this first graph of how many members, even though I now clearly have about twice as many, that does not mean my income stayed twice as much. So this graph is the income, and you can see that spike when I first changed, and then you can see it go down really drastically. And yeah, again, pretty drastic with the people coming and going, but you can see on average it's starting to go back down. And if you see at the very end of the graph, that end is almost exactly where the graph had been before the spike of the pay what you can starting. So after being pay what you can for about 2 years, that's why I said, yeah, people went down to the lowest one, but it wasn't all at once. It's taken about 2 years for almost everyone to end up down there. For example, my highest tier, my $15 tier, that's where I probably had like anywhere from 20 to 40 people over there originally. From month to month, again, it fluctuates. We're down to 1 person at that tier. I think I have a graph for that too. This is my graph of the different tiers, and that squiggly blue line, can you guess which one that is? That's the lowest tier. So you can see the green one, the next highest one by a very, very large margin. That's the $10 one, which used to be the most popular. That was the Self-Pub 101 tier, so that was the tier you had to be in to get the bonus content for that. So that used to be the most popular. You can see that very, very large discrepancy now. And that red one that really peaked January 2022, that was the $2 one. So yeah, it's been interesting. After about 2 years, I still have twice as many people over there, but now I've gotten pretty much back to what I had been making before with half as many people. So yeah, I'm gonna jump into some pieces of advice, and then we will get into some more specific numbers. My number 1 piece of advice, illusion of choice. Give people, this is the same with your books. If you're also an author and you have the different formats of your book, that big gap in pricing, it makes people feel like they're saving money. If they see that your hardcover is $25 and your ebook's only $4, they feel like they're getting a freaking deal. So plan that your lowest tier is going to be what everyone subscribes to. Even if not everyone does, most everyone will. Even if it doesn't start off that way, over time, most people are gonna end up there. So make sure if everyone does end up at that tier, it's still sustainable for you. So make it low enough that it's attractive to people, but it's not so low that it's not worth you doing it anymore, which is what I learned with the $2 tier not being worth it if everyone is in that one, so we had to get rid of it. Now $5 is the lowest. Keep in mind you're also not getting the full $5. Patreon takes their cut, and you've got like payment, processing fees and stuff. You're not getting that full $5. Piece of advice number 1, make your lowest tier sustainable. Plan for the worst, plan everyone's going in there. Number 2, be dependable. Make good on your promises. I try really, really hard to never be late with my content. I don't know if I ever actually have been. Try not to be respectful of people's time and people's money. They're there to support you. Make good on your promises and make sure that the content that you're giving them is valuable. They subscribe to you for a reason. They may have just subscribed because they like you and they want to support you, but a lot of times people are there because they want specifically what you have to offer. I like that Patreon lets you do like polls and stuff so you can find out what the people there want, what they're most interested in. Another thing is Patreon is not like any other social media where it's something that people are going to organically find it on their own. They're not going to. You have to constantly point people to it and funnel people there. It's not something that like you're making great content, so if you make it, they will come. They will not know. They cannot see. It is behind a paywall. So what I do every time I post something new over there, every time a new post goes live, I share it elsewhere. Usually like an Instagram story, like, hey, this just went live on Patreon. Specifically if it's something I think people will be interested in, if it's a topic that I think will really get people's attentions or people's curiosity. There are definitely certain times of year when I can expect a much larger influx of people because there are certain videos that I do every year that people are interested in, and they might not be interested in the content for the rest of the year, but everybody wants to see that income report at the end of the year. You can have links to it on your other social media. Like for my YouTube videos, it's linked in the description of every video. I have it linked in the back matter of all of my books. I have it linked alongside all of the other social media on my website, on my business card where it lists all of my social media. It's included there. So just make it available, make it easy to find, but also just telling people, hey, I have a Patreon. It's not really gonna entice people to get over there. Show them examples of what kind of content you post. Show them what you're offering. Show them something that's going to entice them. And in general, if you're trying to minimize the costs and time and the effort on your part, I would recommend keeping everything digital. A lot of authors will offer physical goods where they ship stuff out every month. If that's your thing, awesome. If you've never done it before and you think that might be your thing, I'm just gonna warn you, fulfillment is going to take a lot more than you are expecting. It's gonna take more time, it's gonna take more money, it's gonna take more resources. Be realistic, do you have the time? And last piece of advice, don't overpromise a crazy number of rewards. Be realistic about what you're gonna be able to make, not just in 1 month. This is a monthly commitment. Every single month, are you going to be able to keep up with this? I've gotten it to a place where I feel like I can manage the 3 pieces of content every month, even if I'm traveling half the month, even if I get sick, I can manage to make those 3 things somewhere in a month. The old stuff I used to offer, much harder to keep up with. There's a reason it ended. But in general, this is probably something that's supposed to make your life easier. Don't do a crazy amount of things that's just gonna stress you out. So I did show you some of the numbers basically if you were looking closely at the graphs. So I averaged out the last 12 months of earnings, and this is like what actually hit my bank account minus the fees that Patreon takes, minus the payment processing fees, all of that kind of stuff. On average for the last 12 months, Patreon brings in about $771 a month for me. Again, this fluctuates pretty greatly, like January of every year, always my best year, or always my best month, the income report and stuff like that. Yeah, every month will fluctuate by like several $100s, but on average, 771. So if we go back and we divide that by the estimated number of hours that I do for the page each month, on the high end, if I have like really long, really complicated to edit videos, then it takes me about 9 hours to make the content. That comes down to about $85 an hour. If it's a shorter month, the videos are shorter, not as many people sent in questions for the podcast, simpler content, that can be closer to $220 an hour. Now, this is not the way it has always looked. I would say, just like glancing at the numbers, I'm not going to actually average them out, but looking at the numbers from 2021 before I did the pay what you can system, I feel like the average was closer to maybe $500 or $600 a month. So it's getting close to there, but it's still a little bit higher. But then even before that, looking at like 2020 numbers, much smaller. We're looking at like $150 in a month, closer to like $300 or $400 in some months. And then way back when I first started in 2019, the first month I ever had it was $56 in the month. I had 1 month where I got over $100. So it definitely took a while for me to like test and find my footing and to, you know, teach people how to get over there. My content over there has changed pretty drastically. I definitely saw spikes when I started posting the Self-Pub 101 videos. Those seem to be really interesting. People like to see the behind the scenes stuff. And I definitely find the more like transparent I am with my content, the more I show numbers and stuff, the more people are interested. I don't just share like my specific numbers and stuff. I also share the not so great stuff when I have big losses with marketing things that don't work out and stuff like that. So I think people just appreciate seeing the transparency. If you're someone who subscribes to my Patreon page, if you want to leave a comment on like what it is that you enjoy about the page, I would be curious to know. But other people might too, if they're looking to do a page themselves and they want to know like what people are looking for. I did add up all of the entries. I don't know how accurate this is. I took them from my income spreadsheets, not from Patreon itself, because Patreon for some reason won't let you just like download a report of everything. But since I started the page, it seems this is the total that the page has brought in, about $56,500 over the past 4 years. So if you're wondering, is it worth it? Potentially, yes. It definitely took some time to get this to where I think it is sustainable, and it does fluctuate from month to month, but it fluctuates in a range that I'm good with. And I do have to kind of tweak the page from time to time on how much the tiers cost, what kind of content I'm offering, how much content I'm offering with how much time I have. And it's been about 2 years since the last major shift, so there might be another one coming next year. We'll see. One thing I did forget to talk about that is a little more reader-centric that's on my page was I do have a Patreon exclusive book called Project Z. Originally, I released this in a serialized fashion where I put out a couple of chapters every week, and I also put a video along with it where I had like discussions about what was happening in the chapters right then, and people who were reading the book could send in questions and I could answer them in the videos. To be perfectly frank, that was not successful at all, which is why towards the end I stopped doing the weekly drops of chapters and I just put the whole book on there. You can just go download the full book. I think that would have been more successful if I had built up the Patreon page to be more of a place for my readers before doing that. Yeah, I just didn't have very much engagement when I did that at all. So I kind of felt like I was just like screaming into the void, and I don't even know if people watched the videos, to be honest. But you can still download the book in its full form on the page. It's not like publishing quality. This is a book that I wrote way back in like 2018, 2019. It has not been edited. It does not have a professional cover. it hasn't even been edited by me, let alone a professional editor. It is a draft form. This was strictly like, this was a book that I vlogged the whole process over on YouTube way back when I was doing it. So this was more of like, I wanted people who had followed along for the whole process and who were curious about this book to be able to read it if they wanted to, because I was never planning on publishing it. So it was never gonna see the light of day anyway. So I was like, for the people who've been following this for years and who are curious, here it is, you can read it. That is one other thing on the page that I forgot about. If you're curious, if you wanna read my old writing that's unedited, it's pretty rough. The book is pretty rough. The original idea was like a college-aged Xenon. We have two main characters. One's on Earth, one is in a space station, and it's kind of like Xenon meets The Selection. I haven't looked through it in a long time, but it's nostalgic for me. I think that's everything. I think that was all of my notes. If you have any other questions about Patreon in general, or pay what you can and whatnot, feel free to drop them in the comments down below. I hope this video was helpful. I'll have other videos linked down below as well if you are curious in like other parts of my job, my other sources of income. I think I have one simply about like recommendations for supplementing your income as an author. I also have lots of like stats and number videos. Yeah, they'll all be linked down below. If you have any other topics in the future in this series that you might want to see, feel free to let me know. But other than that, I think I will just see you guys in our next video very, very soon. Bye. No.